This was all Lovina could hear, and the laughters and chatters from doctors. She wasn't sure where she was at first. Her head was feeling heavy, her body was feeling frozen. Then the sound of the machines, steady and rhythmic, told her she was in the hospital. Then she felt it, the cold metal against her skin, the sharp tugging in her stomach, the unbearable pressure. Something was definitely wrong. She wasn't supposed to be awake. She tried to scream. Nothing came out. She tried to move. Her arms wouldn't budge. Her legs were useless. Terror gripped her chest as she listened to the voices around her. The doctors were talking, laughing, joking about their weekends, as if she wasn't lying there, helpless. As if she wasn't feeling everything. She tried again. Her throat burned. Her mind was screaming, but still nothing. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and they chose to ignore her. This is Lovina. Lovina is 28 years old. She is strong, kind and hardworking. A school teacher who loves her students. A woman with dreams, with plans, with a future. She never thought she would end up here, in this hospital, under this light, feeling every single thing while doctors pretended not to hear her silent cries. The pain came suddenly. At first, Lovina thought it was just a stomach ache, something she ate maybe. But as the hours passed, the pain got worse. It twisted deep inside her, sharp and unbearable. She doubled over, gasping, clutching her stomach as sweat dripping down her face. Something was wrong. Her best friend, Tonya, rushed her to the hospital. It's probably food poisoning, Tonya said, trying to keep Lovina calm. But Lovina couldn't speak. She couldn't even sit upright. By the time they reached the hospital, she was barely conscious. The doctors took her in immediately. Appendicitis, they said. A routine surgery. They assured her that everything would be fine. Lovina believed them. She shouldn't have, because the worst night of her life was about to begin. Lovina remembered being wheeled into the operating room. The lights above her were blinding. A nurse smiled down at her. "You will be asleep in just a moment," the nurse said. A mask covered Lovina's face. She inhaled. Darkness came. At least, that was what's supposed to happen. But then she woke up. She could hear the machines. She could feel everything. She was still on the table. Something cold pressing against her stomach. Then sharp pain. A deep slicing pain, as if someone had just cut her open. Lovina tried to move. She tried to scream, but her body didn't respond. Her eyes wouldn't open. Her mouth wouldn't even move. But she could hear them, the doctors. They were talking. They were laughing. She won't remember a thing, one of them joked. Lovina wanted to cry because she would remember. She would remember everything. That was all Lovina could hear. At first, the sound felt distant, like it was coming from far away. But then it grew louder, sharper, more real now. The steady rhythm of a machine. Lovina wasn't supposed to be hearing this. She wasn't supposed to be awake. Her skin felt cold, too cold. The kind of cold that seeped into her bones. The kind that made her want to pull a blanket over herself. But she couldn't move. Something was wrong. Then pressure. A strange tugging pressure deep in her stomach. At first, it wasn't painful, just uncomfortable. Like someone was pushing something around inside her. Her mind felt slow, heavy, like she was underwater. But then, sharp pain, raw, deep. A burning, cutting sensation spread across her stomach, and Lovina's entire body screamed. She tried to move. She tried to scream. Nothing happened. Her mouth wouldn't open. Her arms wouldn't lift. Her legs wouldn't bulge. and she could feel everything. She could feel the scalp moving, slicing through her skin. She could feel the stretching, the pulling, the gloved hands pressing down, holding her open. Panic clawed at her chest. Lovina tried to breathe, but her lungs felt too tight. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, faster than the beeping machine beside her. She wasn't supposed to be awake. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Them voices, casual, relaxed, as if they weren't cutting her open. She won't remember a thing one of them said, laughing softly. Lovina wanted to cry because she would remember. She would remember everything. A sound slipped out of her throat, not a scream, just a small broken whimper. For a second, the voices paused. A man coughed. Did she just did that? It's fine, another voice. A woman said quickly. It happens sometimes. It happens all the time. No, this wasn't fine. This wasn't normal. Lovina tried to move again, harder this time. She focused all her energy on wiggling a finger, twitching a toe. Anything, nothing. Her body refused to listen. The pressure in her stomach worsened. The sharp pain became unbearable, tearing through her inside like fire. And still, the doctors kept talking. So, you heading anywhere this weekend? One of them asked, his voice calm and light. Another chuckled, nah, I'm just staying home, probably gonna binge some Netflix. They were talking about Netflix. While Lovina lay there, trapped, helpless, feeling every slice, every pull, every movement inside her body. She wanted to scream until her throat bled, but no one would hear her. Or worse, they heard her, and they didn't care. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Lovina had no way of knowing. The pain swallowed her whole, pulling her into a silent agony she couldn't escape. Then finally, the stitching, the tight pulling sensation as they sewed her back together, piece by piece, as if she was nothing more than a ripped cloth. The voices faded, the lights dimmed, and then darkness. This time, it was real. When Lovina woke up, she was back in the hospital room. The bright light hurt her eyes. The pain in her stomach was still there, dull, but heavy. Her head was spinning and her throat was dry. For a moment, she thought it had been just a dream. Then she saw the IV in her arm, the steady beeping of the machines beside her, the faint scent of disinfectant in the air. Not a dream. It really happened. She had felt everything. The door creaked open. A nurse walks in, smiling gently. You're awake. The surgery went well. Lovina stared at her. Her mouth felt like sandpaper, but she forced out the word. I was awake. The nurse looked at her. What? Lovina swallowed hard. Her voice was shaking. I felt it. I heard you. The nurse was already shaking her head. No, sweetheart. You were completely under. That's just Anesthesia playing tricks on you. It can cause weird dreams sometimes. Dreams? No, Lovina knew what she felt. She knew what she heard. The laughter, the small talk, the casual disregard for her pain. But when she tried to explain, the nurse just gave her that same fake practice smile and patted her arms. It's normal. Don't worry about it. Then she walked away, just like that, as if nothing had happened, as if Lovina was just imagining it. She lay there, staring at the ceiling. Her heartbeat was slow now, steady, almost calm. But inside she was screaming because she knew it. They were lying, and Lovina was going to find out why. Lovina lay there staring at the ceiling. The nurse's words still echoed in her head. It's normal, don't worry about it. Like she had imagined it, like the pain wasn't real, like the voices, the laughter, the cutting, none of it had happened. But it had. Her fingers gripped the thin hospital blanket, twisting it in her hands. Her stomach ached, a deep throbbing pain that wouldn't go away. But that wasn't what was making her feel uneasy. It was a lie. They were lying to her, and she needed to know why. The next morning, Lovina asked to see her medical records. A nurse, different from the one before, raised an eyebrow. I have to check with the doctor, she said. Her voice was a little too high, a little too forced. Lovina didn't miss the way she hesitated, didn't miss the way her eyes flicked, just for a second, towards the hallway before she turned and walked away. Something was wrong. Lovina had been in the hospital before. They didn't ask for permission to give you your own record. They just handed them over to you, unless there was something they didn't want her to see. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't just in her head. She needed proof. Hours passed. No one brought the records to her. No one even mentioned them. Lovina waited. She watched. She listened. Something was happening behind the scene. Every time a doctor walked past her room, they didn't look in. Not once. The nurses, they kept their smiles, but something about them had changed. Too careful, too polite, like they were hiding something. By the afternoon, Lovina had had enough. When the hallway was empty, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, wincing as a sharp pain shot through her stomach. The stitches pulled, but she didn't care. She had to move. Her legs felt weak as she stood. The cold tie sent a shiver up her spine, but she kept going, one slow step at a time. Gripping the IV pole for support, she made it to the door. She peeked outside. The hallway stretched out in both directions. Too bright, too quiet. A nursing station sat at the far end, empty except for a half-finished cup of coffee. A few doors were open. She spotted a sign, record room. Her heart pounded. She shouldn't do this, but if she didn't, she might never get the truth. Lovina moved very fast as her aching body would let her. The door to the record rooms was unlocked. That was the first red flag. A hospital kept patients' record locked, always, but this time, this one was just open. She stepped inside. Rows of cabinets lined the walls. Papers stacked neatly inside. The air smelled like dust and printed ink. A single computer sat in the corner. Its screen were dark. Lovina's finger trembled as she flipped through the files. She found her name and pulled it out. The first few pages looked normal. Standard surgery notes, vitals, pre-op details. But then she turned to the anesthesia report and her breath caught. No record of complications, nothing. Not a single note about her waking up. No mention of her struggling. No mention of anything. Like it never happened. Like they had erased it. Her hands tightened around the paper. They were covering it up. And if they were willing to erase evidence, what else had they done? Then footsteps started approaching. Lovina froze. They were coming closer. She shoved the file back into the drawer. Her heart beat, slamming against her ribs. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. She held her breath. Then there was silence. The door handle turned. Lovina barely had time to slip into the shadow of cabinet before it opened. A voice, low and firm. She's asking questions. Another voice answered. A man this time. I know we are handling it. Lovina pressed a hand over her mouth. Handling it? A chill crawled down her spine. They weren't just covering up a mistake. They were watching her. And now, they knew she wasn't letting it go. She had to get out. She had to get out now. Lovina waited, counted the seconds until the voices faded. Then she slipped out, moving fast, ignoring the pain, ignoring the dizziness, threatening to pull her down. She reached her room, climbed back into her bed, forced her breathing to slow. When the nurse walked in a few minutes later, smiling as if nothing had happened, Lovina did the same. She smiled, played along, acted like she was too weak to fight, but inside, she was already planning her next move because she knew something now. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just about her. Something was wrong with this hospital, and Lovina was going to find out what it was, no matter what it took. Lovina hastened everything and left the hospital. She called on her friend to come pick her up. But before she left, she made sure she had everything. She had everything she needed, and she went straight to her lawyer's office. The lawyer sat across from her. He had a thick folder sat on the table between them, filled with witness statements, medical reports, and legal complaint proof. Next to him was Dr. Kenneth, a retired anesthesiologist. Flipped through the pages, nodding grimly. "This is bigger than we thought," he muttered. They've been covering up cases for years. Lovina already knew that. She had seen the records, heard the whispers, felt the fear in Miriam's voice when she told her to stop digging. But Lovina hadn't stopped. She had found others, more patients, more stories just like hers. Some had woken up in surgery and been ignored. Others had suffered from botched procedures, drug shortages, rushed operations that should never have happened. Some never even made it out alive. And every single time, the hospital buried it. But not this time. Lovina took a deep breath. "Let's do it," she said. The lawyer nodded. "I will handle the legal side." Dr. Kenneth leaned forward. "And I will go public." Then Lovina turned to the woman sitting beside her, Sarah, a journalist. She had been the first one to believe Lovina, the first to listen, the first to say, "This is a story the world needs to hear." Now it was happening. And then, before long, with every proof, the headline dropped. Hospitals, court covering up patients' neglect and medical malpractice. Everything exploded. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lovina barely had time to breathe. 1 second, she was on the phone with a reporter. The next minute, she was answering emails from other victims. It was like a floodgate had opened. People were very angry. Doctors, nurses, families of patients who never got justice. Some of them had been silenced. Some of them had taken settlement. Some of them had never spoken about it until now. And the hospital, they were drowning. Investigators were sent in. Lawsuits were filed. The head of Anesthesia resigned. Doctors were fired. The hospital released a statement, a pathetic excuse of an apology, blaming mismanagement and unfortunate miscommunication. But no one believed them because Lovina wasn't just one case. She was the beginning, and now the world was watching. That very day, a black car parked outside Lovina's apartment. She had noticed it that morning but brushed it off until now. The knock came late, too late for anyone normal to be visiting. Lovina hesitated before opening the door. A man stood there, not the one from the hospital, but someone new, dressed in a sleek suit, hands folded neatly in front of him. "Miss Lovina," he said. His voice was smooth. "I would like to talk to you." Lovina didn't move. The man smiled. "A private conversation for your benefit." She should have shut the door. She should have called the police. But instead, she stepped outside because she knew exactly what this was. The hospital's last attempt to silence her. The man held out a folder. "Inside it is an offer," he said. "A generous one." Lovina opened it, and there it was, money. More than she had ever seen in her entire life. Enough to move. Enough to never walk again. Enough to start over. If she agreed to walk away. If she agreed to stay silent. Lovina looked up at him. And then she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they really thought she would take it. She slammed the folder shut. "You can tell them to keep their money," she said, shoving it back at him. "I don't want it." The man sighed, shaking his head. "Think carefully, Miss Lovina. This isn't just about you. It's about your safety." She looked at him. "I already know I'm not safe," she said, "but neither are they." Then she turned and walked inside. She locked the door, she closed the curtains, and she waited. Because now, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person they had ever silenced. And she wasn't done. Months later, the hospital was shut down. Violations, lawsuits, criminal charges. Some doctors lost their license. Some faced prison time. And Lovina, she finally felt free. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe. She had moved to a new apartment, smaller, quieter. She was still healing physically and emotionally. Some nights, she still woke up gasping, feeling the ghost of the scalpel on her skin. Some wounds didn't heal overnight, but she had won. She had exposed them, and now they could never do this to anyone else. Lovina sat at her small kitchen table, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. Her name was still in the news. She was still getting messages from survivors, from lawyers, from reporters. But she was ready to let it go. For the first time in a long time, she could just be Lovina, a survivor, a fighter, a woman who refused to be silenced. Her phone buzzed. She sighed, setting her mug down, looking at the screen. It was an email, no subject, no name, just 2 words, be careful. Lovina's stomach dropped. Her fingers hovered over the screen. The air around her suddenly felt different, like someone was watching her. She looked towards the window. Outside, the street was quiet and normal, but something felt wrong because some secrets, they don't stay buried for so long. Ha! If you woke up during surgery and the doctors ignored you, would you fight for the truth or would you just walk away? Let us know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and share these videos with your family and your friends who might love to see them. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.